Welcome back to part 2 of this shit show, where I'm breaking down the plot for Rise of Skywalker before delivering my final verdict on this film. I felt like I had to split this review up because honestly, there's so many problems with this movie that it starts to make my brain hurt after a while, and there's only one cure for that kind of thing. So our heroes are on an epic quest to do a bunch of busy work and save the galaxy at some point. Their objectives were to find a Sith dagger that'll lead them to a Wayfinder, which allows them to get to Exegol and destroy the navigation tower before Palpatine's fleet of Star Destroyers can take over the galaxy, even though it's kind of already been taken over. Anyway, they've found the dagger, but now they have to reprogram C-3PO to translate the writing on it. So basically we're 45 minutes into the movie, and we haven't really done anything except to replace our first objective with a different objective. It's a total mystery to me why this script keeps adding more and more objectives to an already bloated and convoluted story, but whatever, let us continue our quest. So they get to another planet called Kijimi, where they meet up with a strong female character, and she immediately tries to kill them, but Rey has a fight and then beats her up. Obviously, because she's Rey. And within about 3 seconds, strong female character is like, I like you. And Rey's like, that's nice. Seriously, how the fuck is any of this happening? How does beating someone up make them immediately like and trust you? I'd like to point out that one of the established traits of a Mary Sue is that characters automatically respect and trust them even when they have absolutely no reason to do so. Anyway, it's then revealed that strong female character has a past history with Poe, and that's about as far as we go with that. Why do I get the impression there's a whole lot more to this character that was left on the cutting room floor? Jesus, she never even takes her fucking helmet off. So she takes them to a guy who can do a thing to C-3PO, but doing this will wipe his memory, erasing everything that he is and everything he ever could be. But then everyone's just like, yeah, whatever, get on with it. Wow, such compassion. Anyway, he does his thing and we find out the Wayfinder's inside the wreckage of the second Death Star on the surface of Endor, so they need to get there pronto. But then Kylo Ren's flagship arrives and Rey senses that Chewie's on board. Oh yeah, he's still alive by the way, because apparently he was on a totally different transport ship on the desert planet. A transport which I guess was invisible, because I'm pretty sure our characters would have spotted a large space vessel lifted into the sky in the middle of a huge open desert. This is about as cheap as writing can get, and the movie pulls this shit about 5 different times, baiting the death of a character only to bring them back to life with the most contrived explanations possible. But the more you do this kind of thing, the less impact it has, because there's no reason to be invested in anything when you know it can be switched back around like 5 minutes later. Anyway, so they decide to rescue Chewie, and strong female character gives them a convenient plot device to get aboard Kylo Ren's ship, even though she's been working for years to get hold of it, and it's literally her only way off the planet. But nope, she just hands it over to a woman who beat the shit out of her, and a man who betrayed her once already. Wow, it really was lucky that they happened to run into this one particular character out of an entire planetary population, wasn't it? Because if they hadn't met her, they'd have no way to get on board the Star Destroyer and rescue Chewie. So they get on board and Rey goes to Kylo Ren's quarters to recover Chewie's equipment and the dagger. Wait, what? Why are they doing any of this? You already know where you need to go next. The dagger's completely useless now. Or is it? It's almost like Rey knows it has another purpose because she read the script or something. But isn't splitting up and tackling multiple unnecessary objectives just increasing your chances of getting caught? Like, is Chewie's bowcaster so fucking important that you're willing to risk everything to get it back? Also, why is this stuff even in Kylo Ren's quarters to begin with? Shouldn't it be locked in a big vault or something?
Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
Meanwhile, Poe and Finn break Chewie out of his prison cell and try to fight their way back to their ship, but they're dumb men, so naturally they get captured. But it's okay, because General Hux turns out to be the First Order spy. Never saw that one coming, and he saves their lives so they can escape. Wait, what is actually happening right now? Hux was fully committed to the First Order. I mean, he was happy to blow up half a dozen planets, killing untold billions of people in their name. Now he's totally turned his back on the cause he's followed his whole life. Why, might you ask? Because apparently he really wants to see Kylo Ren dead. You know, there are easier ways to kill someone than engineering the downfall of your entire faction, right? Like, why not just plant a bomb on Kylo's TIE interceptor, or poison his food, or hire the fucking Mandalorian to assassinate him? Do you really think your enemies are just gonna forget that you killed billions of people when this is all over? At the very best, you'll be tried as a war criminal and executed, you dumb plank of wood. Not that it matters anyway, because he gets killed by his own people like 3 minutes later. Meanwhile, Rey recovers the dagger, but Kylo Skype calls her again and they have a pointless fight and then a chat, and then he reveals that she's actually Palpatine's granddaughter.
Oh man! Oh god! Oh man!
But drink her, you conscientious pontificator, I hear you say. I thought Rey's parents were nobodies who sold her for drinking money. How could they possibly be related to Emperor Palpatine? Well, deceptively accurate person, that's correct. They were related to Palpatine, but then he sensed Rey was gonna become a ridiculous Mary Sue one day, so he tried to have her killed. So her parents went into hiding and became nobodies to protect her, and got killed, so she ended up being a scavenger.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
Fuck off, film! You know, I actually feel sorry for JJ at this point. You can tell how hard he's trying to rework the events of Last Jedi into something that can actually be called a viable storyline without completely breaking the narrative. The problem is that when it's this obvious that your main character's backstory keeps changing from film to film, it's kinda hard to get invested in them because nothing about them feels real or solid. Anyway, the Falcon magically shows up and then Rey escapes, and then Palpatine sends one of his Star Destroyers to blow up Kijimi, because all his Star Destroyers now have a Death Star cannon mounted on their hulls. Yup, that's real, that is a thing. I'd like to point out that the original Death Star had to be the size of a fucking moon because of the enormous power requirements of a weapon destructive enough to blow up an entire planet. But this script is just like, nah, it'll be fine. Don't think about it, just consume product. You can kind of imagine the genius brainstorming required to make this plot point happen. So we need to get some kind of super weapon for the rebels to blow up at the end of this movie, because this is Star Wars, and that's basically all we can think of. Well, they already had a Death Star in the original trilogy, and we basically did the same thing in Force Awakens, so we can't do that. Should we have an even bigger Death Star? Nah, that's not very original. I know, let's have a fleet of like 1,000 of them. Imagine 1,000 Death Stars flying all over the galaxy, blowing stuff up. How cool would that be? Nah, good enough, move on. Anyway, they go to Endor and find the Death Star wreckage out in the ocean, and it all looks remarkably intact considering what happened in Return of the Jedi. Are you sure a piece of this size would survive an explosion like that? I mean, I'm no structural engineer, but this thing looks pretty fucked up to my eye. Nah, whatever. So they run into a bunch of horsemen led by a diverse female character. She used to be a First Order stormtrooper, but her entire unit mutinied, and now they're just kind of hanging out. Wait, I thought Finn was the only one who ever mutinied. Like, it was never implied that this was a widespread problem amongst the First Order, so it's like that big that it's happening to whole companies now? How? Why?
Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
Why am I doing this to myself? Anyway, diverse female character says they can take boats out to the wreckage, but it's too dangerous to go right now because there's a storm happening. But Rey just goes anyway, and she's totally fine, because she's Rey. I'd like to point out that Rey grew up on a desert planet, and has very little experience with water in general, and sailing boats in particular, and now she has to sail through 100-foot waves in gale force conditions that would test even experienced yachtsmen. But the script is like, nah, she'll be fine. So she makes her way to Palpatine's old throne room, nostalgia, and finds the Wayfinder. Step 2 complete. Then she has a vision of herself as a Sith Lord, and they have a really awkward fight, and evil Rey makes a Gollum face and good Rey falls over. But then Kylo Ren shows up again. Oh, for fuck's sake, is this ever gonna end? Then they have yet another lightsaber fight, but then Kylo Ren engages beast mode and goes to town on her. He forces Rey back with ease and hammers her into the ground, and it made me laugh because she looks like she totally totally doesn't understand what's happening. It's like a kid that's been spoiled and indulged their whole life, suddenly getting told no. She just doesn't know what to do. If only this kind of thing had happened in Force Awakens, I would have had such a different opinion on that movie. But then I guess the CGI department ran out of Princess Leia outtakes, so she lies down and dies. And that distracts Kylo long enough for Rey to stab him in the fucking chest with her lightsaber. What a dick move, girl. That guy had dropped his weapon, you arsehole. Talk about being a sore loser. So Kylo's dying, but then Rey force heals him, because that's the thing she can just totally do now. So I guess there's no stakes anymore, because characters can just be healed immediately. Anyway, she's all sad, so she steals Kylo's TIE fighter and goes back to Craggy Island, and then burns it, because I guess metal burns really well if you throw enough wood on it. And she's about to throw her lightsaber into the fire too, but then Force Ghost Luke appears and catches it in mid-air, and then he's like, a Jedi should never throw away their weapon. Are you sure about that, Luke? Fuck off, film. In fact, no. Fuck off, Rian Johnson, for making this criticism necessary. This is all on you, you round-headed simpleton. Anyway, they have a sit down and Luke gives Rey a pep talk. And damn, it's almost like this movie's trying to give Rey some kind of character arc? Is that the term I'm looking for? I don't know anymore. It's been so long, I've forgotten what it even looks like. It's actually putting her through adversity and making her question herself. First she loses control and almost kills Chewie, then she loses a fight to Kylo, and then she needs guidance from Luke. This is madness! You know, it's weird that I'm heaping so much enthusiasm on this simple thing, but after 2 movies of getting absolutely nothing, I feel like a starving man that's just been handed a Big Mac. Yeah, it's greasy and unhealthy and it'll probably give you the shits later, but it's a million times better than anything we've had until now. This movie is actually trying. It really is, and that's what makes this review all the harder to do. Anyway, Luke gives Rey another lightsaber that used to belong to Leia, because she used to be a Jedi too apparently, and she decides to go kill Palpatine. Shame she destroyed her only ride off the planet though, eh? But then Force Ghost Luke uses the Force to drag his old X-Wing out of the sea and drop it in front of her, as if that's supposed to be some kind of solution to this problem. It's been sitting on the bottom of the ocean for 10 fucking years. Do you really think it's gonna fly? Oh, I guess it does. I'm not even gonna comment on that. So it's time for the finale, and this is where everything pretty much falls apart. Well, more than it has already anyway. Everyone goes to Exegol for a big confrontation. Rey's there to kill Palpatine, Poe and the Resistance are there to blow up the Sith fleet, and Kylo Ren wants to redeem himself by helping Rey. But Poe has a crisis of confidence because he doesn't think he's ready to lead the Resistance or something. Gee, it's a pity you don't have an actual rebel general literally sitting right next to you who's already led major fleet engagements in the past. That's the kind of guy you'd probably want to put in command at a time like this. Ah well, never mind. So Rey tracks down Palpatine, and he does the exact same shit he did in Return of the Jedi. He wants to goad Rey into killing him to save her friends, because then his spirit will transfer into her body or something. But she's like, nah. Then Kylo shows up and teleports one of her lightsabers into his hands, and kills the Knights of Ren in like 30 seconds.
Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
Man, this forced teleportation thing is pretty useful, isn't it? You can get yourself out of all kinds of problems now. This fight is embarrassing. Kylo just tears through them as if they're not even there. They don't even have blasters or lightsabers, just metal weapons like it's a fucking medieval battle or something. He just hacks them down. Wow, I'm really glad I waited 3 movies to see these chumps in action. Really lived up to my expectations. Meanwhile, the Resistance fighters are having a tough time against the Star Destroyers. They deploy space horses, yup, that's another thing which happens, and it plays out just as badly as you might think, to board the flagship and blow up the tower, but it's not enough to stop the Sith fleet and the battle starts to turn against them. But then, like a million reinforcements magically arrive, and they start winning again. It turns out the whole galaxy has united to join their cause. What the fuck are these people? Where did they all come from, and why? Kinda makes me wonder what they've been doing in The Last Jedi, to be honest, but whatever. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Kylo and Rey join forces to kill Palpatine, but instead he lifts them into the air and sucks the life force out of them to get stronger again. Then he throws Kylo into a pit. I love how his entire plan that he's been working on for decades suddenly changes in that very moment. Like the character's entire motivation flips on a dime. It's almost like the writers are making this stuff up as they go along. So now that Palpatine is fully charged, he shoots Force Lightning at the Resistance fleet that's powerful enough to disable them. But then Rey wakes up because all the Jedi Force Ghosts told her to, and she tries to attack Palpatine, but he shoots Force Lightning at her. But then she uses 2 lightsabers to deflect it back at him, and he blows up and dies.
Well, that's definitely shite.
I'm not kidding, that's it, he just blows up. Then Rey dies, but Kylo reappears and brings her back to life, and they kiss. In case you're wondered what that noise was, that's every Reylo shipper on the planet simultaneously reaching orgasm. And then Kylo dies of boredom and or embarrassment. I'm not kidding, that's what happens. And the movie ends with Rey going back to Luke's old home on Tatooine. Nostalgia! Because she has no personal history with the place or actual reason to be there. And she now has a gold lightsaber because why not, eh? And then some mad old woman asks who she is, and I guess Rey hasn't appropriated enough things for herself already, so she's like, I'm Rey Skywalker. And I was like, no, you're not. You had to do it, didn't you, film? You had to get one last insult in before you fucked off into obscurity. Jesus, talk about disrespect. You are not a Skywalker, Rey. You have never been a Skywalker. Yes, you're an idealized fantasy female empowerment insert character, but you can't just identify as something you want to be and expect it to be true. Anyway, that is it. That absolute clownish nightmare is the plot for The Rise of Skywalker. What a total, complete, and perfect disaster. This movie isn't just an insult to Star Wars. It doesn't just make a mockery of everything that came before it. It's an affront to simple common sense and intelligence. A desperate, amateurish, horribly written, badly acted, bloated, and monumentally dumb conglomeration of half-formed ideas, discarded plot threads, disjointed storylines, and redundant characters that feels like fanfiction written by a 13-year-old with ADHD. You know, it almost seems like a formality to offer up my thoughts at this point, considering everything I've just described to you. I mean, where do I even begin? Trying to criticise this movie's failings is like trying to destroy an all-you-can-eat buffet with a pair of chopsticks. I suppose, since it's the season of goodwill and all that, I should start my analysis by looking at the positive aspects of this movie. This shouldn't take long. The biggest and most fundamental positive of this movie is that it's basically a giant fuck you to The Last Jedi and everything that movie represents. And that makes me smile, especially seeing how angry The Last Jedi defenders have got about it on Twitter. For a start, the social justice narratives and the insufferable political messaging that had me gritting my teeth through The Last Jedi are mostly gone now. Yeah, the cast is still conspicuously diverse, and there's a few obligatory strong female characters, and there's a totally random lesbian kiss at the end that I'm sure half of Twitter will be spurging over for months, but the feeling of thinly veiled hostility and arrogance is missing now. The men aren't all portrayed as hapless, idiotic clowns, and the women are slightly more flawed and human. Basically, I didn't feel like this movie actively hated me because of my race and gender, so I guess that's an improvement. Nobody's favourite character, Rose Tico, is relegated to the role of glorified extra here, and goddamn man, the movie gets an extra point for doing that alone. It doesn't have the balls to kill her off, or write her out of the story altogether, but she's so irrelevant this time around, it doesn't matter too much. There's also some kind of attempt to give Rey a tiny bit of personality and character struggle. She makes mistakes, she almost loses a fight, she struggles to control herself, and she even has to turn to Luke for guidance. It's basic, fundamental stuff, but it helps a great deal. That being said, she's still OP as fuck. She can use Force abilities that are so insanely powerful that they almost render the whole concept of the Force irrelevant. There are no limitations or rules or resource costs on anything anymore, and as a result, it's impossible to get invested in what she's doing. And it's not helped by a bland, indifferent performance from Daisy Ridley. I've never considered her a great actress at the best of times. She doesn't really command the screen, she's not charismatic or interesting to look at, and her acting range is best described as specific. but somehow she seemed to have gotten worse here. She looks confused and stony-faced most of the time. She doesn't seem invested in what's going on around her, and as a result, I didn't really care about her either. One of the core objectives of this story seemed to be to get the main trio together, go on an adventure, and overcome challenges and problems together. You know, like they should have done 2 movies ago. There's lots of jokes and snappy dialogue, and a valiant attempt to give them a sense of banter and camaraderie, and while it feels kind of forced and rushed, it's better than nothing, I guess. Oscar Isaac in particular has got mad charisma, and it's nice to see him finally allowed to have some fun with his character. I think this movie handled the real-life death of Carrie Fisher about as well as possible given the situation, writing Leia out of the story with dignity and sensitivity. She's only in a handful of scenes, and although it's pretty obvious where they had to restructure dialogue to fit whatever footage they had to work with, I do appreciate their efforts. It's not the glorious swan song the character deserved, but it's the best we were likely to get. I get the impression there was a lot of good intentions behind this movie, but unfortunately, good intentions don't amount to much if you can't execute them properly, and this is where the real problems come in. The story in Rise of Skywalker is an absolute mess, riddled with plot holes, contrivances, conveniences, a bloated cast of characters with no purpose, inconsistent motivations and decisions, and dodgy retcons of past events that create as many new problems as they solve. When you've created so many obstacles for yourself, it's inevitable you're going to fall over them sooner or later. It's also very obvious that this movie's been horribly butchered in the editing room, most likely because of studio interference. The first act in particular is rushed, disjointed and hyperactive. Characters jump from planet to planet every 5 minutes, always searching for the next plot device and getting into fights and mini adventures along the way. There's never time to catch your breath. The whole opening of this movie is a convoluted web of contrived objectives and pointless busy work, and I can't help but feel this time would have been better spent developing the characters and their relationships, considering this is the 3rd film and we barely know anything about any of them. Have them slow down once in a while and just talk to each other. You don't need to have everyone running around and frantically yelling at all times. And this is a particular habit of JJ's, who's basically become the master of what I like to call rapid fire stupidity. If you throw enough shit at the audience and you do it quickly enough, then they won't have time to question what they're seeing before the next stupid event comes along. Just keep things moving and they won't know what's up. It's a tried and tested approach that pretty much got him through Star Trek and even The Force Awakens, but it finally falls apart here because he's simply trying to juggle too many events at the same time. Rapid fire stupidity only works if you keep things simple, mate. Subplots are taken up and then abandoned with no explanation, like the hints of a romance between Finn and Rey, or the suggestion that the group are being tracked by the Knights of Ren, or the relationship between Poe and strong female character, or that diverse female character might be related to Lando. It's all hinted at, but none of it goes anywhere, and the end result is what feels like 3 different movies, all hastily mashed together into some kind of Frankenstein's monster of a plot. It's not helped by the fact that JJ is clearly trying to work around the events of The Last Jedi instead of biting the bullet and just correcting them. Now we have to contend with fucking hyperspace tracking and holdo maneuvers, as if the mechanics of this universe weren't convoluted enough already. The return of Palpatine made me feel absolutely nothing. He's just there, just a cackling pantomime villain who says and does whatever the plot needs him to. I mean, it's nice to see Ian McDiarmid back in his most famous role, but Jesus, he doesn't have much to work with here. I'm just fucking glad they left Darth Vader out of this. I guess there's some graves that even Disney aren't willing to desecrate. Not yet, at least. The fleet of Star Destroyers were a terrible idea that totally don't improve when you see them in reality. Only one of them ever gets to use its ability, and the others seem to get blown up really easily when the plot needs it to happen. People can land transports on their hulls with no difficulty whatsoever, because as we learned in The Last Jedi, slow-moving transports are really difficult targets to hit. Space horses can mount cavalry charges along their topside with no concerns, when it would be so easy for the bridge crew to bank the ship sideways and make them all fall off like a bunch of total assholes. Also, I still don't understand why these things are even necessary. The movie's framed as if the First Order have already taken over the galaxy. Yeah, they've taken losses along the way, but it's never been suggested that they're short on manpower or resources, so why do they even need these extra ships? There's nothing left to conquer. Another massive problem that hangs over this movie is the Force. See, in the original trilogy, the Force was subtle and used sparingly, like when Luke hears Obi-Wan's voice in his head and later sees his Force ghost, or when he uses Force pull to retrieve his lightsaber, and when Palpatine used Force lightning for the first time, it was like, holy shit, this guy's powerful. Now it's just been elevated to ridiculous levels. Now the Force can pluck spaceships out of the sky, heal fatal injuries, host Skype calls, teleport objects across the galaxy, and cast lightning bolts strong enough to disable entire war fleets. There's no limits, no rules, no indication of what's possible or not, so there's no way to buy into it. This is a world where you have no idea what anyone can do at any given time, so pretty soon you just stop caring. And I guess that's the big takeaway from this film. There was absolutely nothing in this movie that delivered tension or drama. I never cared for a single moment about what was happening. I didn't worry about the characters or whether they would survive. I didn't feel sadness when some of them died, or relief when others came back to life. The dramatic journey in this film was a complete flat line for me, and I think that speaks volumes about how badly it failed. Now, having said all of that, I don't really hold much of a grudge against J.J. Abrams for this mess. Yeah, his input probably didn't help the situation, but he's not really the one who caused it. The goodwill and enthusiasm of the fan base was non-existent by this point. Most of the major story threads have been destroyed, and it's pretty clear that an increasingly nervous Disney caused even more problems behind the scenes. Rise of Skywalker was basically set up to fail before it was even written, like a runner starting a race with 2 broken legs. And I guess that's why I've been a little more generous with my criticism than usual here, because I recognise the impossible mountain this film had to climb, and in some small way, I also recognise the mostly good intentions behind it. Unlike The Last Jedi, which came across as an intentional fuck you to longtime Star Wars fans, I think in its own way, this movie was a genuine but futile attempt to right the ship. Yeah, it might have failed, but really, what else was it gonna do? Nothing short of a complete restart would have saved Star Wars at this point. Which leaves me to ponder the question of, where do we go from here? When the dust settles on this movie, what will the final verdict be on Disney Star Wars? Well, I think the most damning label I can apply to it is apathy. At this point, we've kind of moved beyond anger and frustration and into the realms of, I don't give a shit. Most people I've spoken to have already moved on from it, and I think that's the worst fate for any story. To be forgotten. Go pretty much anywhere in the world today, and I'll bet someone there's heard of Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Princess Leia. No matter your age, nationality, colour, or creed, we've all been touched by Star Wars in some way. It came out more than 40 years ago, but at its heart, it's a story that's timeless and universal, with characters that strike a chord generation after generation. But a few decades from now, nobody will remember Rey or Kylo Ren. Nobody will care about the First Order or the Resistance. Nobody will talk about the Battle of Crate or the death of Snoke. The story told by Disney is vacuous and shallow. Its grand concepts disorganized and blighted by ego and agenda. Its ideas and messages are so focused on our present day fears and frustrations and petty grudges that it fails to realize what made Star Wars so appealing in the first place. It was an escape from all of those things, an escape to a galaxy far, far away. And with that in mind, I want to end this review with a little message of my own to the leaders at Disney and Lucasfilm. In the very slim hope that any of you happen to be watching this video, I want to say this. I hope it was worth it. I hope the destruction of one of the greatest IPs in the history of cinema, the humiliation of characters beloved by whole generations, the perversion of the heartfelt moral lessons taught by the original trilogy, the nullification of all the struggles and triumphs and sacrifices that came before, and the brutal and permanent division of the Star Wars fanbase was all worth it for you. I hope it was worth it to have your little moment, to push your half-baked politics and current year agendas into a story that was once timeless and universal. And I hope it brought you real pride and fulfillment to mock and belittle and put down anyone who dared to question your actions. I know your pride and egos will never allow you to publicly admit just how badly you screwed this one up. I know you'll never have the backbone and humility to take responsibility for this failure, but lying awake in your beds in the small hours of the night, with only the darkness and your even darker thoughts for company, maybe you'll pause to reflect for a moment on what you did. Maybe you'll finally realise that despite all the money and the hollow accolades from people just as vacuous as yourselves, your most enduring legacy will be one of absolute failure. If anything good at all has come out of this disastrous mess, it's that the scale of your incompetence only underscores the superiority of all the movies you tried so hard to bury and forget. Working with less money, more primitive technology and fewer resources, George Lucas achieved something you'll never ever equal. A legacy to be proud of. And believe me, you're gonna have a very long time to think about that. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Go away now.